The Honourable David Carter.
Of all the contributions I've heard in this House, that one was full of jealousy and spite. That sums up the Labor Party's attitude to the farmers of New Zealand. When this government wants to protect property rights, Mr Parker calls them filthy rich millionaires and says he'll deal to them. Labor have rolled Damien O'Connor. Here's what Damien O'Connor said on the 4th of August. High country rentals based on earning capacity is a good principle to base lease payments to the Crown. And he goes on to say, I'm sure farmers will welcome the decision and get on with farming and protecting their leasehold properties. I agree with Damien O'Connor. But David Parker and Mr Hodgson have obviously rolled Damien because they've changed tact. It sounds to me, though Mr Parker wasn't prepared to say it, that they're now going to oppose this legislation. Mr Speaker, I'm proud to be part of this debate because it finally gives some finality and surety to a group of people, a small group of people that were treated in a despicable manner by that member and by Helen Clark and the Labor government. Mr Speaker, what that member doesn't realise is the high country farmers of New Zealand are a very special breed of people. They live in the harshest environment in New Zealand. They live there, they farm there over a long period of time to bring up their families, and on the whole they do a superb job for the environment. And they certainly, Mr Parker, do a substantially better job than any Wellington-based government department could ever do with that country. But Helen Clark never believed that, Mr Speaker. For some reason, she had a real snitcher against the high country farmers. I thought it was just Helen Clark, but we've seen tonight it's David Parker, and every national member of caucus should send that speech to every farmer they know, because we now know the respect that David Parker has for property rights. Mr Speaker, over the 9 long years of the Labor government, that government of Helen Clark ran a concerted campaign to run the high country farmers off the land, Mr Speaker. The first tactic was effectively to stop tenure review by demanding the Department of Conservation became totally obstructive, grabbing more and more good pastoral land into the DOC estate. When that failed, Helen Clark and David Parker then announced they'd exclude a good number of those properties automatically from tenure review because they might have a water view. That's what David Parker did, and that didn't finally kick the farmers off the land, so they came up with the final strike. They raised the rent not by hundreds of percent, but in some time by thousands of percent. And I can quote farms, Mr Parker, where the rent that you proposed for the high country station was actually higher than the gross income of the farm property. How was that ever going to work, Mr Parker? It wasn't. Mr Speaker, what we've done is finally giving some security back to these farming families. We're going to leave them with a rent that's based on income earning capacity. It's a rent that's affordable. It's a rent that will leave those farmers with some money to spend on things like wheat and pears so that they can maintain that environment, Mr Speaker. I asked that member, Mr Parker, just to think how unsettling his and Helen Clark vendetta on these people has been for the last 9 years. Mr Parker laughs, but if he got to know these people, he came from this area. No wonder they kicked him out as the Member of Parliament, for Otago. If he had any empathy with these people at all, he'd know what his policy, his former Labor Party policy, did for those people. Mr Speaker, I'm very proud to support this legislation. It finally brings a resolve to what has been a very difficult issue for our high country community. It gives a clear demonstration that this national government actually respects the property rights that these high country farmers had. They had a lease in perpetuity, which Mr Parker was inclined to completely ignore, and then come up with all these other very devious ways of trying to drive them off the land. Mr Speaker, this bill provides an equitable settlement for all parties. It'll be simpler to administrate, it'll be more transparent, it provides a fair rent, it allows these guys who live in that environment to get on with the job of farming, to look after the high country, and I'll guarantee to Mr Parker these guys do a substantially better job than any government bureaucracy could ever do.
The Honourable